Napoleon Bonaparte. The name alone screams ambition, power, and domination. But what if I told you the man who conquered most of Europe also wrote the ultimate playbook on how not to negotiate, how to screw up alliances, and how ego can tank even the most brilliant plans? This isn't just history. It's a masterclass for every entrepreneur, hustler, and strategist out there. Because if you're building an empire, whether it's a business, a brand, or your own life, Napoleon's wins and fails hold the lessons you need. Stick around because I'm about to break down the greatest leadership hacks and mistakes that history's most famous conqueror accidentally left behind. This is the mind of Napoleon, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. Napoleon's mindset and why it matters. All right, let's talk about why we're diving into Napoleon's brain. And no, it's not just because he looks great in a bicorn hat. This is about what makes Napoleon more than just a historical figure. The man was a powerhouse, a military genius, a political strategist, and let's be real, one of the most polarizing figures to ever walk this planet. But here's the thing, Napoleon wasn't perfect. In fact, he made enough mistakes to fill a library. Yet, it's those mistakes that hold some of the juiciest lessons for anyone building something big. His mind wasn't just about conquest, it was a blueprint for ambition, decision-making, and sometimes colossal failures. Why should you care? Because whether you're negotiating deals, managing partnerships, or just trying to make your next big move, the principles that drove Napoleon's successes and his downfalls apply directly to you. Timing, trust, perception, strategy. They're the tools of empire building, whether your battlefield is the boardroom or your side hustle. Napoleon's ambition, the ultimate hustler mindset. Napoleon was the original hustler. He didn't come from a royal family or some cushy setup. He was born on the island of Corsica, basically the middle of nowhere in Europe at the time. But here's the kicker. By the time he was in his 20s, he was a general. And not just any general, the kind that could take a ragtag group of soldiers and turn them into a winning machine. Why? Because Napoleon understood something most people never get. If you can't win with what you have, you figure out how to change the game entirely. He wasn't playing by the rules, he was rewriting them. And that's a mindset every entrepreneur should take to heart. You don't need all the resources, you need the vision, the strategy, and the guts to execute. The importance of strategy, why you can't rely on talent alone. But here's where it gets interesting. Napoleon's genius wasn't just in talent, it was in strategy. He could outthink and outmaneuver his opponents because he always knew what they wanted, what they feared, and what they didn't see coming. Think about it. How often do we jump into something without understanding the other side? Whether it's pitching a product, closing a deal, or even just winning an argument. Knowing the motivations of your counterpart is the ultimate cheat code. Napoleon mastered that, but he also ignored it at times. And when he did, the fallout was massive. Spoiler, we're going to see exactly how this played out in his diplomacy fails later in this video. But for now, just remember this. Success doesn't come from just being the smartest or the strongest. It comes from being the most prepared. Why we're studying this now, the lessons hidden in history. Let me be real with you for a second. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a blueprint for how to think bigger, act smarter, and avoid some of the dumb mistakes even geniuses make. Napoleon's victories were epic, but his failures, oh, they're a treasure trove of don't try this at home. By the end of this video, you're going to see exactly how to apply these lessons to your life. Whether you're building a business, negotiating with clients, or just trying to make it through your next big challenge, these principles are going to change the way you approach the game. So buckle up because we're about to dive into Napoleon's biggest moves and biggest blunders, and trust me, you're going to want to take notes. Next up, we're heading straight into 1806, a year where Napoleon thought he had it all figured out. But one letter to Britain's Charles James Fox showed us exactly how timing and trust can make or break a deal. Let's get into it. Part 2. The negotiations of 1806, lessons in timing, trust, and perception. The year is 1806. Napoleon's playing chess, but Britain's playing poker. All right, picture this. Napoleon Bonaparte is fresh off a winning streak that's got all of Europe talking. He crushed the Third Coalition, redrawn the map, and basically told every other monarch, you're either with me or irrelevant. But there's one problem, Britain, that stubborn little island with its invincible navy and endless tea supply, refuses to back down. Their blockade is strangling French trade, their economy is thriving, and they're not exactly quaking in their boots at Napoleon's latest conquests. So what does our boy Napoleon do? He decides to pivot. He's going to talk to Britain. Revolutionary, right? Enter Charles James Fox, Britain's foreign secretary. Now, Fox is not your typical stiff upper lip politician. He's an idealist, a guy who actually admires parts of the French Revolution. He's open to peace, maybe even eager for it. Napoleon sees his opening, drafts a charming little letter, and sends it off. And that's where things go hilariously wrong. Napoleon's letter, a masterclass in bad timing. Let's break this down. Napoleon's letter to Fox was beautifully written. It was eloquent, persuasive, and had just the right amount of, hey, let's stop fighting and be friends. If Napoleon was on a dating app, this letter would have been a super like. But here's the problem. Napoleon's actions didn't match his words. While his pen was writing about peace, his armies were out there gobbling up territories and flexing on Europe. It's like sending a let's collaborate email while CCing your lawyer on the takeover paperwork. Fox is intrigued, bless his heart, but the rest of Britain are not so much. They see this letter for what it is, a calculated move to stall for time while Napoleon consolidates his power. Timing, folks. Even the best pitch will flop if your actions scream, I can't be trusted. The fallout, trust issues, and missed opportunities. Now, let's talk about how this went down. Fox tries to push for negotiations, but he's up against a British government that's basically allergic to the idea of trusting Napoleon. They take one look at his letter and go, yeah, no, this guy's playing us. The negotiations stall before they even start and the war drags on. Napoleon's overture isn't just rejected, it's used against him as proof that he's insincere. And here's the kicker. Fox wasn't the problem. The timing, the lack of trust, and the complete mismatch between Napoleon's words and actions, that's what sank this ship. For Napoleon, this was a missed opportunity of epic proportions. He had an opening to at least explore peace, but his ego and impatience got in the way. Instead of laying the groundwork for trust, he jumped straight into the pitch. Classic overreach. Key takeaways, what entrepreneurs can learn from Napoleon's blunder. All right, so what's the lesson here for all you hustlers, entrepreneurs, and empire builders out there? Let's break it down. First off, timing is everything. Napoleon's letter came way too soon. Fox might have been on board, but the rest of Britain wasn't ready to listen. In negotiations, if the other side isn't ready, even the best pitch will flop. You've got to read the room, or in Napoleon's case, the continent. Second, trust is the currency of negotiation. Napoleon's actions, expanding his army, consolidating territories, completely undermined his message of peace. If your actions don't back up your words, no one's buying what you're selling. Build trust first. Words might open the door, but actions seal the deal. Third, perception is reality. It doesn't matter if Napoleon was sincere, which, let's be honest, is debatable. Britain perceived his letter as a calculated move, and that's all that mattered. In business and diplomacy, how you're perceived often carries more weight than your actual intentions. And finally, actions speak louder than words. While Napoleon was writing about peace, his armies were doing the exact opposite. Inconsistency is the fastest way to kill a negotiation. If your actions and words don't align, you're not just losing trust, you're losing the deal. Conclusion, a cautionary tale, in ego and impatience. Napoleon's ill-timed overture to Fox is a reminder that even the smartest guy in the room can shoot himself in the foot. Timing, trust, perception, and consistency, they're not just buzzwords, they're the foundation of successful negotiation. For entrepreneurs, the lesson is clear. Don't pitch before you've laid the groundwork. Build trust, read the room, and align your actions with your message. Because in the end, it's not your charm or your words that close the deal. It's your strategy and your credibility. Napoleon didn't get that memo, but now you have. So, the next time you're negotiating your next big deal, remember the guy who conquered Europe but couldn't conquer the art of timing. And speaking of timing, let's jump ahead to Napoleon's next big diplomatic misstep, this time with Austria. Spoiler, it involves partnerships, egos, and another lesson in what not to do. Stay tuned. Part 3... The Austrian Intervention, 1807-1808, lessons in managing partnerships and competitor motivations. Napoleon and Austria, a partnership gone wrong. All right, let's fast forward to 1807. Napoleon's empire is bigger, his ego's even bigger, and his enemies, well, they're not going anywhere. Enter Austria, the wild card in this drama. Now, Austria is not exactly Napoleon's biggest fan. He steamrolled them at Austerlitz back in 1805, and they've been licking their wounds ever since. But here's the thing about Austria. They're nothing if not opportunistic. They see a chance to stay relevant in European politics by mediating peace between Napoleon and Britain. Seems like a win-win, right? Napoleon gets a shot at peace, and Austria gets to flex as the neutral mediator. But Napoleon, he's not having it. He doesn't just reject Austria's offer, he dismisses it outright like it's an insult to his genius. And that, my friends, is where things start to go downhill. Napoleon's refusal when ego overshadows strategy. Let's break this down. Austria's mediation offer wasn't just a goodwill gesture, it was a strategic move. By positioning themselves as a neutral party, Austria was trying to rebuild trust and relevance after their defeat. They weren't just offering Napoleon a way to de-escalate tensions, they were giving him a golden opportunity to stabilize Europe and refocus his energy elsewhere. But Napoleon, ever the control freak, couldn't see past his ego. To him, Austria's offer wasn't helpful, it was an insult. Why would the Emperor of Europe need Austria's help? He's Napoleon, for crying out loud. So instead of seizing the opportunity, he shuts it down, pushing Austria closer to his enemies. This wasn't just a missed opportunity, it was a tactical blunder. By rejecting Austria, Napoleon didn't just alienate a potential ally, he gave Britain and Russia reason to strengthen their anti-French alliances. Austria, feeling snubbed, quietly starts plotting its next move, one that won't involve helping Napoleon. Key takeaways, what entrepreneurs can learn from Napoleon's misstep. So, what can we, the modern-day hustlers and empire builders, take away from this diplomatic mess? Let's unpack it. First, partnerships are everything. Napoleon's refusal to work with Austria wasn't just a rejection of their offer, it was a rejection of collaboration. In business and life, partnerships can open doors you can't walk through alone. Austria wasn't just offering mediation, they were offering a chance to build goodwill and trust. Napoleon's ego blinded him to the long-term value of that partnership. Second, rigidity is a killer. Napoleon's my way or the highway attitude cost him big time. Flexibility isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strategy. Austria wasn't asking Napoleon to bow down, they were offering to share the burden of negotiation. A little give and take could have gone a long way in strengthening his position. Third, always consider your competitors' motivations. Austria wasn't trying to undermine Napoleon, they were trying to stay relevant. By understanding their motivations, Napoleon would have turned their offer into a strategic advantage. Instead, he let his paranoia and pride get the better of him. Finally, don't burn bridges unnecessarily. Rejecting Austria outright didn't just end the conversation, it escalated tensions. In business, diplomacy, or even your personal life, preserving relationships, even strained ones, can pay dividends later. Napoleon's dismissal of Austria pushed them into the arms of his enemies, and he paid the price for it. Conclusion: the cost of overreach. Napoleon's handling of Austria's mediation offer is a textbook example of what happens when ego overshadows strategy. He had the chance to stabilize Europe, build a stronger alliance, and even take some pressure off his empire. Instead, he chose dominance over diplomacy, and it backfired spectacularly. For entrepreneurs, the lesson is clear. Partnerships thrive on respect and collaboration, not control and rigidity. Our flexibility isn't about giving up power. It's about gaining influence and understanding your counterpart's motivations. That's not just strategy, it's survival. Napoleon didn't just burn a bridge with Austria, he torched the whole network. And while he might have thought he was proving his strength, all he really did was prove that even a genius can be his own worst enemy. So, the next time you're tempted to dismiss an offer or reject a partnership, ask yourself this: are you thinking like a strategist or like an emperor with something to prove? Because one of those wins the game and the other just burns it all down. And speaking of burning things down, let's jump into 1810, where Napoleon's empire starts to crack and his inner circle decides it's time to do a little freelancing. Our spoiler alert, it doesn't end well. Stay tuned. Our secret diplomacy in 1810, lessons in risk, transparency, and strategic alignment. Napoleon's inner circle, when freelancing goes very, very wrong. All right, by 1810, Napoleon's empire is at its peak, on paper at least, but behind the scenes, things are starting to fall apart. The continental system, Napoleon's grand plan to choke Britain's economy, is faltering. His allies are getting restless. And in the middle of all this chaos, Joseph Fouché. Now, Fouché isn't just anyone. He's Napoleon's minister of police, basically the guy who's supposed to keep everything under control. But Fouché, he has ideas, big ones. Ideas that involve diplomacy, risk-taking, and not telling Napoleon what he's up to. That's right, Fouché decides to go rogue, sending an agent to Britain to explore peace talks. On paper, it's bold. In reality, It's a recipe for disaster. Fouché's plan: bold, reckless, and totally unauthorized. So here's the setup. Fouché sees that Napoleon's policies are driving Europe to the brink. He figures, hey, maybe I can fix this. And without bothering to loop in the Emperor of France, because why would you? He sends an agent, Fagin, to Britain to test the waters for peace. Now, let's pause here. Imagine one of your top executives deciding to negotiate with your biggest competitor behind your back. Bold move, right? Also, career suicide. But Fouché genuinely thinks he's helping. Fagin sneaks off to London, starts poking around, and guess what? The British don't take him seriously. Why? Because he's not Napoleon. And if you're Britain, why waste time negotiating with someone who doesn't have the authority to deliver? Fouché's grand plan doesn't just flop, it sends ripples of distrust through Napoleon's entire inner circle. Napoleon finds out the emperor's wrath. Now, you can probably guess what happens next. Napoleon finds out about Fouché's little side hustle, and to say he's unhappy would be the understatement of the century. Napoleon doesn't just shut it down, he explodes. To him, this isn't just insubordination, it's betrayal. Fouché's actions don't just undermine Napoleon's authority, they make France look weak. If Britain thinks Napoleon's ministers are going rogue, what does that say about his control over his empire? The fallout is swift. Fouché gets stripped of his title, his reputation takes a nosedive, and Napoleon doubles down on his iron grip over his government. But the damage is already done. The trust between Napoleon and his advisors is shattered, and the cracks in his empire only deepen. Key takeaways: what entrepreneurs can learn from this mess. All right, let's dissect this train wreck and pull out the lessons for all you modern-day hustlers and strategists. First, alignment is everything. Fouché's plan failed not because it was a bad idea, but because it wasn't aligned with Napoleon's vision. In any organization, alignment is key. If your team isn't on the same page, even the best plans can implode. Second, transparency isn't optional. Fouché thought he was helping, but his secrecy turned a potential solution into a political scandal. In business, transparency builds trust. Whether it's a new project or a risky negotiation, keeping key players in the loop is non-negotiable. Third, credibility matters. Britain didn't take Fouché seriously because he wasn't Napoleon. In negotiations, credibility is everything. If you don't have the authority or the trust of your counterpart, your words carry zero weight. Finally, know when to take risks and when to hold back. Fouché's move was bold, but it wasn't calculated. Risk-taking is essential for growth, but those risks need to be measured and aligned with the bigger picture. Otherwise, you're just rolling the dice and hoping for the best. Conclusion: when strategy loses to ego and chaos is Fouché's rogue diplomacy isn't just a story about betrayal, it's a lesson in what happens when strategy loses to ego, secrecy, and misalignment. For entrepreneurs, the takeaways are clear. Keep your team aligned, prioritize transparency, and never, ever underestimate the importance of credibility. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about having bold ideas, it's about executing them in a way that builds trust and strengthens your position. Napoleon's empire may have been vast, but it was only as strong as the people holding it together. And when trust cracks, so does the foundation. So the next time you're tempted to go rogue or take a risk without alignment, think of Fouché. Proof that even the boldest moves can backfire spectacularly if they're not part of a cohesive strategy. And speaking of risky moves, let's jump into Napoleon's next big challenge, one that involved territorial negotiations, British stubbornness, and a little region called Hanover. Stay tuned. The Morlaix negotiations, 1810, lessons in strategic compromise and leverage. Napoleon's empire versus Britain, the battle for leverage. Now we're in 1810, and Napoleon's empire is still dominating the map of Europe, on the surface at least. But beneath the surface, cracks are forming. His continental system is strangling trade, not just for Britain, but for his allies too. Tensions are rising, and Napoleon knows he can't keep this game up forever. Enter the Morlaix negotiations. The goal? Peace talks between France and Britain. The stakes? Oh, just the future of Europe, no big deal. And at the heart of these talks is one hot-button issue, Hanover. For those of you unfamiliar, Hanover isn't just some random territory. It's a region deeply tied to Britain's royal family and national pride. And Napoleon, he's holding on to it like a poker chip, ready to cash in for a bigger prize. The Hanoverian Question: leverage versus flexibility. Here's how it goes down. Napoleon walks into the negotiations with a clear strategy: use Hanover as a bargaining chip. He knows Britain wants it back and he's willing to discuss it, but only on his terms. Britain, of course, demands its unconditional return. To them, Hanover isn't just land, it's a symbol of sovereignty and legitimacy. Napoleon sees this as an opportunity to push for concessions, maybe an easing of the continental system or guarantees for French influence on the continent. But here's the problem. Napoleon doesn't just use Hanover as leverage, he refuses to budge. Instead of finding common ground, he doubles down, making demands that Britain can't and won't accept. The result? The negotiations stall, tensions escalate, and the war continues. Napoleon's rigid approach costs him more than a potential deal. It costs him time, resources, and trust, things his empire can't afford to lose. Key takeaways: what entrepreneurs can learn from the Hanoverian Question. So, what can we, the modern-day empire builders, take away from this high-stakes diplomatic standoff? Let's break it down. First, leverage is a tool, not a weapon. Napoleon's strategy to use Hanover as a bargaining chip was smart, but his refusal to compromise turned that leverage into a liability. In negotiations, leverage is only effective if it leads to progress. Use it to find solutions, not to create impasses. Second, know when to compromise. Napoleon's unwillingness to yield on Hanover showed strength, but also short-sightedness. In business, compromise isn't weakness, it's strategy. Sometimes giving up a little now can secure a bigger win later. Third, understand what matters to the other side. For Britain, Hanover wasn't negotiable. It was a core issue tied to their national identity. Napoleon's failure to recognize this made any deal impossible. Always understand your counterpart's priorities and non-negotiables. It's the key to finding common ground. Finally, think long-term. Napoleon's rigid approach might have seemed like a power play, but it prolonged the war and strained his resources. In business and life, short-term wins mean nothing if they jeopardize long-term success. Flexibility isn't just a tactic, it's a survival skill. Conclusion: the cost of rigidity. The Morlaix negotiations were a golden opportunity for Napoleon to de-escalate tensions, stabilize his empire, and refocus his energy. Instead, his refusal to compromise turned them into yet another missed chance. For entrepreneurs, the lessons are clear. Leverage is important, but flexibility and understanding your counterpart's needs are what seal the deal. Negotiation isn't about crushing your opponent, it's about creating outcomes that work for everyone. Napoleon's insistence on holding the line with Hanover might have preserved his ego, but it didn't preserve his empire. And if there's one thing we can learn from this, it's that rigidity isn't strength, it's a weakness disguised as power. Final takeaways: what Napoleon's mind teaches us today. So, what have we learned from the mind of Napoleon? Timing, trust, perception, leverage, and flexibility, these are the tools that make or break leaders, entrepreneurs, and negotiators. Napoleon's successes were legendary, but his failures, they hold some of the greatest lessons for anyone building their own empire. The question is, will you take these lessons and apply them to your life, or will you, like Napoleon, let ego, impatience, and rigidity get in the way of your greatness? The choice is yours. This has been the mind of Napoleon. Now go out there and conquer, but do it smarter than the guy who thought he could take Russia in the winter.